Did you know that the sandwich was invented by a compulsive gambler? That the Chinese fortune cookie is not from China? That the first hamburgers were thought to contain body parts? Since the earliest days, Americans have collected recipes from far-flung lands. Then we season and spice, bake and broil, simmer and scorch, and we reinvent. From cultures around the world, we've gathered our favorite foods and we made them our own. Hot dogs and ice cream cones, hamburgers and pizza, fried chicken and the sandwich. The foods we eat have become emblems of America itself. They're fast, fun, and a little funky.
Mustard, pickle, and onions, always. That's the old-fashioned way.
Chopped liver, okay, corned beef, Russian dressing. I just love it.
They're mass-produced and custom-made.
Two on the plate. Where's the roll?
Give me a plain cheese pie, well done.
And each food has an amazing story to tell. The story of American food is the story of American ingenuity. An uncanny ability to take food from somewhere else, bring it here, and make it, well, more interesting. Of course, no one did this better than America's immigrants, especially those who arrived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Many came with just the clothes on their backs and something priceless, the recipes for their own unique foods.
We are a mixture of the eating habits of the many cultures and the many peoples who have come together in the United States. We've made the cultural diversity of the United States part of ourselves and our everyday lives, and we enjoy doing it.
Still, there wasn't always so much to enjoy. Imagine a world in which pizza didn't have cheese, where there was no peanut butter to go with your jelly, and where the hot dog was served, if we dare say, without a bun. The hot dog, an American gastronomical icon, almost synonymous with American culture itself. No matter how you eat yours, with mustard, pickles, onions, or kraut, just about everyone likes hot dogs. At home, over the campfire, at the game, or on the beach. And the story of the hot dog is a very American tale, spiced with immigrant dreams, hard work, movie stars, and inspired hustle. The hot dog has an ancient and noble ancestry because undressed, the dog is really just a simple sausage, and sausages are as old as civilization itself. In ancient times, butchers needed a way to preserve and store precious meat to keep it from spoiling. Sausages were simple enough to make. Chop the meat fine, mix in pepper and other spices, squeeze it into a piece of animal intestine. After preserving it by smoking or drying, it could keep for months, even years. The ancient Greeks made sausage. Homer describes it in the Odyssey. The first Christian Roman Emperor Constantine tried to outlaw sausages in 300 AD because he thought they were too bound up in Rome's older pagan ways. No use. Constantine may as well have told his people to stop drinking water. But that's all ancient history. The humble hot dog as we know it dates from the 19th century, when German immigrants brought over the sausage that was destined to become world famous. By the 1850s, the so-called Wienerwurst, or Frankfurter, after Frankfurt, the supposed city of its birth, could be found in New York's German groceries, the delicatessens. These sausages were usually beef with a little pork or lamb tossed in. One old sausage maker's trick was to add a little veal, which made the sausages plump up when they were heated. A hot dog special effect that is still familiar today. the late 1800s, grinders were invented that could chop the meat into a superfine mixture. A hungry diner could chew and swallow a frank in under a minute, an early fast food. So now America had itself a real wiener. But before America fell hard for this Teutonic tidbit, there was still one crucial ingredient missing: the bun. And how it met the sausage is a tale of heated debate. Some say that the original meeting place was the one most commonly associated with the dog today, the baseball park. In 1901, a man named Harry Stevens sold ice cream at the Polo Grounds, home of the New York Giants. Legend has it that one cold day when ice cream wasn't selling, Harry Stevens had an inspiration. He ordered his crew to buy frankfurters from surrounding German shops. To make them easy to hold, he slapped them onto Vienna bread rolls. The new snack caught on. Some vendors called them Red Hots. Others nicknamed them Dachshund dogs after the long, skinny German pooch. And hot dog lore has one man putting the two names together.
The sports cartoonist T.A. Dorgan drew a cartoon having the vendors say, "Get your Red Hots, get your Red Hot dogs here." Now, no one has ever found this cartoon.
Whoever named the hot dog, there's no question where the dog became famous. New York's Coney Island. And the man who started that association was German immigrant Charles Feltman. In the late 1860s, Feltman was a meat pie vendor on the skinny spit of land at the bottom of Brooklyn. And according to Coney Island history, Feltman was the first one to put a dog in a bun. He got nervous when his competition started selling sandwiches, which were easy for the busy customers to eat on the go. So Feltman rigged a small charcoal stove to his wagon, boiled frankfurters, and then wrapped them in toasted buns. Within 10 years, Feltman's Coney Island wagon had grown into Feltman's Ocean Pavilion Hotel and Restaurant. It was a huge success, serving 7,000 people at once, many buying franks at a dime apiece. Then, on a momentous day in 1915, the hotel hired a young roll slicer named Nathan Handworker. These were the days before automation, so every roll had to be hand-sliced.
My father, when he started out, the roll, came in, he had his hand there, and he had to use a knife. And, he was pretty fast. He was pretty good in it.
Handworker was a Jewish immigrant fresh from Poland. He worked hard, and he was liked by everyone. And when a couple of the regular customers at Feltman's, a pair of struggling actors named Jimmy Durante and Eddie Cantor, told him he should start his own shop, Handworker considered it. He saved his money. One story says he did it by eating nothing but the hot dogs he could get for free at work. And after saving $300, Nathan quit Feltman's for the chance to take his own bite out of the American dream. Nathan's Coney Island hot dog stand opened on a corner just down the street from Feltman's in 1916. Nathan set out to make a better hot dog by first changing the blend of spices.
And my father asked my mother to see, she was the cook in the family in those days, and he asked her to see if he can develop a spice formula that he can give to the spice manufacturer who sold to the meat people, the manufacturer of the hot dogs.
Nathan's dogs were a little more peppery than Feltman's and a little juicier. They were all beef, they used lots of pungent garlic, and they were wrapped in a natural intestine casing, which made them crunch when you bit them. But most importantly, Nathan sold them for just a nickel, half the price of a Feltman frank. The first price war in hot dog history. And wouldn't you know it, it backfired.
A lot of people, when he opened up with a 5-cent frankfurter and Feltman's was 10, they were a little worried. What kind of food do you give with a 5-cent frank?
In the early days, cheap hot dogs were being made out of dubious bits and pieces of pigs and cows. Nathan was using quality beef, but how to convince people of that? He offered free pickles, free root beer, but nothing worked. Finally, he came up with one of the greatest publicity stunts ever. He offered free meals to doctors at the Coney Island Hospital on one condition: they show up at his stand wearing their white lab coats. Once the public saw doctors eating at Nathan's, well, the health concerns over a nickel dog were cured. An important step in making Nathan's famous was the arrival of the subway in Coney Island in the early 20s and the building of the boardwalk in 1923. The beachfront was transformed into the so-called Subway Riviera. As beachgoers stepped out of the station, the first thing they saw was Nathan's. Now, no trip to Coney Island was complete without pushing your way to the block-long counter for a crackling, natural casing Nathan's.
You just take a look at the subway, and you just see thousands of people coming off and walking to the beach. And if it rained in the middle of the afternoon and the people would be coming off the beach, everybody on the counter would say, "They're coming off." and you'd just be deluged and it'd be overflowing into the streets, and it would just go on. It would seem like an eternity.
The best of the griddle men at Nathan's could sell 60 hot dogs a minute. The hot dog's popularity surged. When the talented grill men plied their trade at Nathan's stand, magic happened. And that magic attracted some very familiar faces. Babe Ruth took his dogs with mustard, onions, and sauerkraut. It was whispered on the boardwalk that he ate 10 or 12 dogs between the games of a doubleheader.
Unbelievable, but true.
Celebrities who had survived on nickel hot dogs from Nathan's in their vaudeville days came home to Coney Island.
He got every celebrity imaginable, and so in the mythology of Nathan's hot dogs, Jimmy Durante and Eddie Cantor and all the famous celebrities who played vaudeville in those days went to the stand, gave him publicity.
Now Nathan's really was famous. But the Hollywood glamour was only part of the hot dog's magic. It was the everyday folks lining the counter that really made the Franks so famous.
The beauty of the American hot dog is it is a democratic food. It is served to everybody, no matter what the social level.
By the mid-1960s, in a mere 50 years, Nathan Handworkers Company had sold 600 million hot dogs. But the hot dog had one more door to knock on, the door to the American home. And that was opened by Oscar Mayer Jr.
Oscar Mayer gets hot dogs out of the ballpark and out of the street food category into the home, largely by marketing to kids in the 30s and 40s.
The Mayer family owned a successful meatpacking business in Chicago. They were among the first to slap their company name on every package of meat they supplied to the supermarket. And they helped make the hot dog a favorite with the help of a publicity stunt.
Oscar Mayer presents Wienermobiles on the Roll.
In 1936, Carl G. Meyer dreamed up the 13-foot Wienermobile.
Internal combustion hot dog.
He hired a midget actor, put him in a chef's outfit, called him Little Oscar, and sat him in the bumper seat.
Frankfurter rolled across the land.
Look, Little Oscar. Little Oscar, the world's smallest chef.
The Wienermobile spread the fame of Oscar Mayer and the hot dog through the appetites of children. It turned out to be the perfect food for campfire cooking and for young mothers. Hot dogs were pre-cooked, easy to prepare, easy to chew, and kids genuinely liked them.
Oh, I'd love to be an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I truly like to be. 'Cause if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, everyone would be in love with me.
They knew that kids go shopping with their mothers. Get them to buy these hot dogs. Mom, I want this hot dog. So, of course, mothers give in. They don't want to hear it.
The American dog itself was still evolving. Most of today's dogs don't have any skin at all. The meat is chopped and mixed, squeezed into a plastic casing, and cooked in the shape of a link. And then the casing is peeled away, leaving the meat behind. And although most dogs are all beef, there are chicken dogs, turkey dogs, even some which harken back to the bad old days.
There are some real old-time hot dog brands which will serve you things like cow lips, cow ears, pork snouts, you will see it, lymph glands. There are brands which do it. That's the way they used to be made once upon a time.
Sleek and streamlined, plump and juicy. We all love a good hot dog. You might even say it's out of this world. And by the 1970s, hot dogs were. Literally, dogs were just one of the comfort foods sent by NASA into space to fulfill the astronauts' hunger for a taste of the good old US of A. But the astronauts' dogs had to fly without their traditional co-pilot. There was just no room in the capsules for the yeast-risen buns. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. Pizza pie. Just the words start your mouth watering. Everyone knows what they like on their pizza. Year after year, the #1 topic is pepperoni. And we're just as sure about what we don't like. At the bottom of the popularity charts, you guessed it, anchovies. On average, Americans down 100 acres worth of pizza every day. That's 350 slices per second. Pizza has been around in one form or another since the ancient Greeks. Old world tribes baked pizza by putting bread dough on the hearthstone next to the fire. They brushed the top with olive oil and herbs, even wine. And toppings, vegetables, and a smidgen of cheese. Sound familiar? The first focaccia bread. It was the Greeks who came up with the handle idea, leaving a puffy rim of crisply baked crust for grabbing onto. The Romans grabbed it, and they took it to Italy. And a good thing, too, because it was Italians, or more precisely, the people of Naples, who added a key ingredient, the tomato. And they did it out of economic necessity. Naples was at the heart of an impoverished region. Few people had the money to eat well. In their search for something that could make life a little better, Neapolitans turned to the tomato.
And the good news about the tomato is you can plant the tomato, and 3 or 4 months later, you've got a lot of fruit to eat.
It took a powerful hunger to get Neapolitans excited about the tomato, since most Europeans thought the tomato was useless or worse. It was a member of the nightshade family of plants and shrubs, some of which are poisonous, and there were other charges against it.
It was squishy, it was red, it was not the right color, it didn't taste the right way, so there are all sorts of reasons on why it was not adopted.
But of course, it tasted good. So, after it was shown that you could enjoy it and survive, it caught on, gradually becoming the key ingredient of southern Italy's rustic cuisine. In 1889, pizza was elevated to a position of national pride when Italy's Queen Marguerite paid a visit to Naples. A local baker made her a pie that featured the colors of the nation's new flag. Tomatoes for the red, basil for the green, and for the white, soft, sweet mozzarella cheese, traditionally made from the milk of water buffaloes. In bringing the Queen the first pizza margherita, this pioneer nailed down another landmark, the first recorded pizza delivery. The next delivery came soon after that. But this time, the destination was all the way across the Atlantic, and the delivery man, a 15-year-old boy. Gennaro Lombardi arrived in New York from Naples around 1895, one of 4 million Italians who came to America between 1880 and 1920. Trained as a baker back home, he found work in a grocery store as soon as he landed. Every day, a parade of workers came and went past the store to factory jobs.
So he started to make pizza. He persuaded the owner of the grocery store that he wanted to make pizza, and the people would pick up their pizza in the morning when they went to work.
And work they did. Back home, most of the new immigrants had been farmers, but here they put in 6 long days a week in the factories, driving America's industrial revolution.
They used to work 14-hour days then, and they used to take the pizza They used to put it on the radiator in the factory. And they would have it for their lunch, and when they worked late, they would have it for their dinner.
Lombardi wrapped his pies in paper and cardboard, tied them up into bundles, and sold them cold out of the shop window. Only one kind of pizza, though, tomato and mozzarella. Finally, at the age of 24, he opened his own business. His pies always sold out.
Back in 1905, the city declared that to own a business, you had to have a license. He was the first guy down there to get a license because he wanted to be a real, true American. $2, that was it. And he hung it in the window as if it was a diploma from Harvard.
In Little Italy at the turn of the century, Lombardi perfected his trademark pie. Thin, dark, and crunchy, with slabs of mozzarella and tomato sauce, cooked quickly in a coal-fired oven for an even, dry bake.
The temperature right now, where the coal is right in the middle of the coals burning, is 2,000 degrees. In the pizza oven itself, it varies between 700 and 800 degrees. I can run a locomotive on this oven. That's how intense the heat is. So that's why my pies come out the way they do. This is Victor, my head pizza chef.
Lombardi-style pizza became New York-style pizza because Gennaro trained many of New York's first pizza chefs. He was happy to take new immigrants fresh off the boat from Naples and give them a job. But of course, family came first. His kids and their kids all took their turn before his ovens. And old man Lombardi was never an easy man to bake for.
The preparation of the ingredients and all, you had to really prove yourself in that area before my grandfather would let us even make a pie.
For years, pizza remained a well-kept secret hidden in New York's Little Italy. But by the 1920s, pizzerias began to spread to Massachusetts, Connecticut, and beyond. In Chicago, a new style of pizza appeared. It was called deep dish pizza. Its inventor was Chicagoan Ike Sewell, who wanted a pizza pie special enough to deserve a sit-down meal. In 1943, after experimenting with variations on the pizza theme, Sewell and a partner came up with a 2-inch deep crust packed with gobs of mozzarella cheese, meat, and vegetables, and baked in a heavy iron pan. A pizza that weighed in at twice the bulk of a New York pie. They named their establishment Pizzeria Uno. And thanks to Pizzeria Uno, Chicago became the pizza capital of the Midwest. But still, pizza was not a national fad. That took a war. In 1943, in some of the most bitter fighting of World War II, American GIs fought their way through Sicily, onto the Italian coast, and then slogged their way to Naples. The American boys were welcomed as heroes by the locals who served them pizza. The GIs brought their taste for their newfound treat back to America. By the late 1940s, pizzerias were popping up all over the country, and they added a gimmick to bring them in. A pizza chef, throwing the dough high in the air and catching it before he rolled it out.
It's a show, it's a drawing card. It pulls the people in. He's doing something magical with a piece of dough. He's flinging it up in the air. It's an attraction, it's a gimmick. It works. We do it here too. Not supposed to. You rupture the dough. You're supposed to spread it naturally with your hands. But again, you know, it's showbiz.
The next step in making pizza big was in making it small.
The slice. The slice changed everything in the 50s.
And it's really only in the 50s that Americans of differing backgrounds start to eat pizzas in large numbers, usually in corner, Italian-run pizza places.
With pizza in such high demand, the next development was inevitable, the pizza chain. In 1958, entrepreneur brothers Dan and Frank Carney rented a tiny brick building in Wichita, Kansas, and opened a pizzeria.
We borrowed $600 from my mom in order to get started and bought a bunch of old ovens We had a sign that was given to us that would take only the number of letters, 3 letters after the word pizza. And after several meetings, my wife came up with the idea that it would be Pizza Hut. This was the natural.
The Carney brothers worked late into the night and still remember walking home in the dark, smelling like pizza. But after months of experimentation,
pull the switch.
Pizza Hut was a success. But it took another pair of brothers from Detroit, Jim and Tom Monahan, to take the next giant step in pizza history. The Monahans figured they'd clean up if the longest trip their customers had to make was to the telephone. The Monahans took a successful idea, home-delivered pizza, and added a classic American flavor, the guarantee. They promised delivery in under 30 minutes. Their original store, Dominic's, became Domino's. Their first 3 stores are still commemorated in the 3 dots in their logo. But as the popularity of pizza soared, the quality suffered. First of all, there were only so many old-world pizza makers around. It was much easier to get the ingredients ready-made from an outside supplier. Coal ovens had given way to efficient gas models. New dough machines had replaced the old laborious kneading by hand. And with refrigeration, there was no need to make up everything fresh. The result was a breakthrough for the pizzeria owner and a sad day for the customer. Pretty soon, it all started tasting the same, whether you bought your pie in New York or St. Louis. There was a good chance you could have the same pizza, for better or worse, in any of 100 cities. But not all pizza was bland, and the phone sure didn't stop ringing at the pizzeria. By 1970, pizza was the #1 home-delivered meal in America, beating out Chinese food. Today, there are more than 60,000 pizzerias in this country, and Americans buy 4.2 billion pizzas every year. Cooked right, there's nothing like that perfect combination of dough, spices, tomato sauce, and cheese.
The sauce that he's using, we make fresh every day. The fresh mozzarella has to be cut like this because if you tried to shred it like a regular processed cheese, it would come out like mush. Now it's going to go right into the oven. That's it. Simple, good ingredients, hot oven. 4 minutes, the pie is out. In and out in 4 minutes. Toppings cooked, everything, crisp. That's the perfect plain classic pizza. A Lombardi classic pizza. It's beautiful. Look at it. I can't say nothing else.
We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. On a super hot grill in Wichita, Kansas, a meatball sizzles in a pile of crackling onions, and sizzles and sizzles. But it's not cooking fast enough. The hungry customers are waiting. At last, in a fit of rage, the cook raises his spatula. Wham! Culinary history. That pesky meatball is squashed into a flat patty. It cooks fast, it's tasty, and the cook notices it fits just perfectly on a round bun. Ask just about anyone to name the most American food of all time, and they'll tell you flat out the hamburger. And they'd be right. 96% of Americans eat at burger joints at least once a year. But our beloved burger started out at the very bottom of the food chain. Once sneered at by the upper classes as blue-collar food fit only for factory workers, the hamburger crossed all class and cultural boundaries to become America's culinary calling card.
Where's the beef?
To find the beef, we travel back to 13th century Russia. It was the nomadic horsemen of the Russian steppes, the Tartars, who launched the meat on its path to glory. The Tartars were known to tenderize meat under their saddles. Often it was shredded with a knife and flavored with a little onion, but not cooked. steak eaten by the Tartars was raw. In the early 1700s, German visitors to Russia brought the simple recipe home. In the port city of Hamburg, German chefs added raw egg, onions, and one more vital touch, they cooked it. Now the beef was juicy, savory, and hot, but still bunless. To earn its bun, the beef would have to cross an ocean first.
So keep good behavior, that's your one lifesaver with Popeye the Sailor.
The first German immigrants, sailors from the port of Hamburg, brought the recipe to American shores with them.
When they brought it to this country, it was still just a ground steak. It wasn't a sandwich. And when the immigrants arrived here, it became known as steak cooked in the Hamburg style.
Delmonico's, the hoity-toity restaurant where the swells hung out in New York City, had Hamburg-style steak on the menu by 1834. But without a bun, it was still just so much chopped meat. So who married bun to burger? As with a hot dog, there are more than a few contestants for that honor. Louis Lassen, owner of an eatery in New Haven, Connecticut, claimed he invented the handheld burger for a customer on the go in 1900. A guy named Frank Mencius said he started it all at the Akron County Fair in Ohio in 1892. But the town of Seymour, Wisconsin, insists that native son Charlie Negreen was inspired to create the hamburger while selling Hamburg-style steaks at the local county fair in 1885.
Well-dressed people of the day were getting grease on their clothes, you know, from handling the meat and all this and the wrapper or whatever. So he got this great idea. Hey, why not take the meat patty, slap it between two pieces of bread?
But the first recorded evidence of beef with bun comes at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri. At that culinary carnival, a newspaper reported that a vendor caused a sensation with a novel invention called the hamburger. Though the vendor was never named, the hamburger took off. Pushcarts selling 5-cent burgers, as well as other quick meals, became as familiar to factory workers as the whistle and the time card. Multiple factory shifts kept these places humming with hungry workers day and night. Chefs had to grind out filling meals in short order.
Lunch carts, horse-drawn lunch carts, you would call this the very first days of fast food because this was the time when things were moving so quickly that people began to eat on the run, on their lunch hours.
But middle-class eaters still turned their noses up at the future king of American food. Suspicious of the greasy eateries and fearing for their health, they claimed that ground beef was really ground for a sinister reason, to allow butchers to sell off spoiled meat, or even worse. Upton Sinclair's classic book, The Jungle, written in 1906, claimed that Chicago slaughter yards were so brutal and filthy, they were grinding up parts of their employees. After the book came out, meat sales dropped by more than half. Sinclair's expose spurred a cleanliness campaign the likes of which the country had never seen. Cleaned-up factories in Chicago were actually open to the public, and slaughterhouse tours became tourist attractions. Still, the hamburger had yet to turn its greasy spoon reputation into a squeaky clean one. Luckily, Hamburger Walt, a Swede from Kansas, rose to the challenge. J. Walter Anderson was a short-order cook with an even shorter temper. It was Walt who smashed that meatball in a fit of rage back around 1915.
And just squashed it down, and it became a patty. And from there, he found a roll to put it on, and unsubstantiated, but that is the beginning of our modern hamburger.
Walt started his very own Wichita hamburger stand in 1916. He installed a counter, 3 stools, and a piece of flat iron for a griddle. He opened 3 more stands by 1920 and hoped to open more. For help, Walt turned to respected Wichita real estate man Billy Ingram.
He went to my grandfather, and my grandfather said that he would help him buy this corner lot, and he would go into partnership with him just on this one.
Ingram and Anderson tackled the down-and-dirty burger image with a clever gimmick: hygiene. They borrowed $700 to build a glorified cement cube with a griddle and 5 counter stools. They painted the store white inside and out. For the name, they chose 2 words that sent a clear message: white for purity and castle for strength and permanence. They borrowed the castle-like look of the place, complete with battlements and a turret, from Chicago's Water Tower, a national symbol of endurance after it survived the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. "The day of the dirty, greasy hamburger is past," pronounced Billy Ingram, and he set out to prove it before the very eyes of his customers.
And he took the good cuts of the meat, ground them up.
Right behind the counter in full sight of everybody. Everybody knew exactly what meat was going into their burger.
Each castle offered a simple menu: burgers, hot coffee, and cold soda pop, all served with a smile. At the outset, White Castle only employed men. A polite and well-groomed cook stood over the sizzling grill. He was under orders to trim his fingernails, shave carefully, and keep neat as a pin.
Correct bad
No
bread,
flashy jewelry.
brush teeth,
Be prepared to speak
have shirt
pleasantly,
neatly
button
tucked
all
in
shirts.
Be ready to
buttons.
make suggestions. No body odor.
But it was the cleanup man, whose sole job was to scrub the utensils and counters all day long, who really defined White Castle.
They used to literally have to clean the inside and the outside of the building daily.
The White Castle burger was small, almost bite-sized. It weighed just 1 ounce. Fresh burgers and buns were delivered to the castle twice daily, a welcome sight for burger skeptics. Then White Castle embarked on the country's first all-out burger marketing campaign. Their target, the greatest skeptic of all, Mom. Ingram had an inventive plan which would prove the little burgers that customers fondly call sliders, belly bombers, and beef cookies were not only safe, they were actually good for you.
He contracted with the University of Minnesota Medical School. This is one of my favorite stories. I think it was for a period of 60 days, for 2 months, a medical student ate nothing but White Castle hamburgers and water. And they gauged his nutrition, they gauged his health along the way, and they proclaimed him to be fully healthy by the end of those 2 months.
A normal child, the report boasted, could eat only White Castle burgers and water and grow to be healthy and mature. Ingram's ads urged customers to buy them by the sack, and they did. White Castle spawned dozens of imitators. The hamburger, which had once been a rough-hewn concoction made to order, was transformed into a sleek assembly line meal. By 1931, the demand for White Castle beef cookies was so great, they went from round to square, the better to fit 30 petite burgers snugly on a grill without wasting 1 iota of space. After a Cincinnati grill man discovered a broken patty cooked faster, 5 evenly spaced holes would be pressed into the meat. During World War II, as America's young men were swept into uniform, women took men's places behind the White Castle counter, a trend which has continued to this day. Eventually, White Castle restaurants would serve 91.5 million hamburgers in a single year. The grillers could produce 3,000 burgers an hour, and customers could easily eat a dozen in a sitting. By cleaning up the shop and selling burgers as health food, Billy Ingram and Walt Anderson had reinvented the hamburger and had turned it into a national favorite. But its greatest days were still to come. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. The end of the Second World War seemed to promise unlimited horizons for America. That meant the future looked bright for the hamburger, which was on the way to becoming our favorite food. And modern technology was ready to usher in this burger-loving age. New automatic burger machines could mold, eject, and stack almost 2,000 hamburger patties an hour. The perfect weapon in the feeding frenzy that was about to hit America. And that frenzy would arrive on wheels. The 1940s, the automobile. In America, a new era of life on the road. As the family car became an essential household tool, the drive-in restaurant became the ideal approach to family dining. Futuristic restaurants sprang up overnight, dotting the American highway like space stations with parking lots. And now that the hamburger's pedigree wasn't questioned, burgers were the perfect drive-in food for Mom, Dad, and the kids. They were easy to make in large numbers, and everyone loved them.
The hamburger, of course, was the core dish at the drive-ins. Probably 80% of the original business was in the hamburger. Everyone knew of the hamburger. Everyone wanted a hamburger. They'd have them for lunch, they'd have them for dinner, and they were reasonably priced.
But the burger eventually outlived the drive-in, which by the 1960s had turned seedy. By that time, a pair of California drive-in owners had begun to change the pace. That is, turn up the pace and clean up the place, so to speak. The burger was getting ready for the big time. Richard and Maurice McDonald had closed down a successful drive-in in San Bernardino in 1948. The change they decided on was stripped-down modern efficiency. No more cars and no more hops. And most important, no waiting. The McDonald brothers slashed their menu to 9 items: hamburger, cheeseburger, 3 different sodas, milk, coffee, potato chips, and pie. No frills. Customers had to walk up to a self-serve window. The new McDonald's concept baffled customers. Some actually pulled right on up in their cars, honked, and waited in vain for a car hop. The opening night was a disaster.
This was a very radical concept at the time because everyone was very much accustomed to having the car hop come to the window, the driver's side window, and drop the tray on the window, and that whole process was just uprooted.
And once at the self-serve window, the customer faced a no-choice deal: ketchup, pickle, and onion only. But within 7 months of the first self-serve McDonald's meal, lines were 200 hungry customers long. Within 4 years, the brothers had sold 21 franchises. Things at McDonald's were cooking along when former milkshake mixer salesman Ray Kroc bought the brothers out in 1961. And with Kroc at the helm, the hamburger reached for record speeds. By 1963, McDonald's was selling 1 million burgers a day and turning them out with fries and a shake in just 15 seconds. At speeds like that, it was no wonder that the hamburger took the lead spot as America's favorite food.
Ronald McDonald, the hamburger happy clown.
In 1967, something even bigger happened to the McDonald's hamburger.
For 2 years, we've been thinking about it and practicing and hoping the day that they would let us try it.
It was the Big Mac. And after Pittsburgh franchisee Jim Delegati created the extra-large double burger for his especially hungry customers, he worked against all odds to get the McDonald's bigwigs to love it too.
You can't do anything without them giving you permission. And first they told me to try it with, I wasn't allowed to have a different bun or anything. So we only had the small bun, and by making my sandwich the way I did, it was just too sloppy. So after about 2 days of that, I said, that's it. I went and, without their permission, and got the double-cut bun and did it that way.
The Big Mac became so famous, it even got its own theme song.
2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Say that again.
2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles.
2 all-beef patties, pickles, sauce, lettuce, cheese, and this.
I said tomatoes.
Yeah. Lettuce and onion, sesame, all
right.
2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions.
And a sesame seed bun.
I think they're describing a big...
McDonald's chief competition was Burger King, a chain founded in Miami soon after the McDonald brothers souped up their California store. Burger King based their appeal on 2 ideas: dining rooms for their customers to sit in and customized meals for picky eaters who didn't want an assembly line meal. As the 60s wound down, rising beef costs and the highly competitive fast food climate forced concessions in cookery. Frozen patties had long ago replaced fresh ground. Now heat lamps help cooked burgers sit around longer on the shelf, at least 3 times longer. By 1969, a third contender had joined the burger wars.
I'm Dave Thomas. I started Wendy's with one restaurant and a philosophy. Don't have hamburgers sitting around.
Calling his restaurant Wendy's after one of his daughters, he said no to frozen meat and no to heat lamps. He said no to burgers cooked only the company's way. Thomas wanted that old-fashioned feeling and that old-fashioned flavor. His first menu featured a burger made from fresh meat that went straight from fry cook to customer, a bowl of chili, and a thick milkshake he called a Frosty.
I never asked people's opinion there. I mean, if I talked about open up a hamburger restaurant or a stand, whatever you want to be, people would say, well, we have too many as it is, and you'll never make it. I mean, so I never really asked people. But I just knew my own, what I liked, and I thought other people might like the same thing.
The Big Two made room for the Big Third, but not without complaint. The burger wars that began before Wendy's arrival continued after, spurred on by Thomas's highly successful Where's the Beef campaign, which poked fun at the size inadequacies of its competitors' patties. The American appetite for burgers left room for all three. The burger world was at peace for the moment. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. Fried chicken, rolled in flour and spices and fried golden brown. Portable Provisions, America's original finger food. For years, fried chicken was a regional specialty, a favorite of the South. It eventually took a civil war, an industrial revolution, and one very famous bearded gentleman to get fried chicken to strut north of the Mason-Dixon line. No one knows for sure who first fried chicken in America, but it's a good bet that Africans who were brought over to America as slaves brought the recipe.
There are some culinary techniques and culinary sort of hallmarks, if you will, that are, if not exclusive to Africa, certainly well evidenced in Africa. And one of those is frying in deep oil, otherwise known as deep fat frying. And so we can, in some small way, claim to have our own little hand in the frying part of the fried chicken.
Well past the Civil War and emancipation, only the wealthy actually ate chicken on a regular basis. It was expensive back then, reserved for Sunday dinners and holidays.
Hence, its African-American appellation, the gospel bird. Okay, because it was Sunday dinner. If you were lucky enough to have it for Sunday dinner, it was definitely Sunday dinner.
After church on Sunday, the pastor would come to your house. You might have invited him over for dinner, and the pastor would come, and the idea of the gospel bird would be sitting at the center of the table, and all hands stayed off until the preacher got whatever piece the preacher wanted.
Of course, it took more than prayer to put that bird on the table. It took work. In the late 19th century, many farm wives started raising the chickens themselves.
There was a time when fried chicken was something that was walking around your backyard instead of something you buy from the grocery store.
The chickens used to have a name. You know, it was Bessie and Lula and, you know, Maribel.
New machines like the incubator made raising lots of chickens possible. In 1880, there were 100 million chickens in America. 10 years later, that number had doubled. Now chicken was an everyday food. For black travelers not allowed into most restaurants, it became the perfect portable meal. No knife or fork required, not much mess, easy cleanup. Many carried their meal in a shoebox, the original box lunch.
Some of the things that you would have in the shoebox would be a piece of fruit, okay, and the piece of fruit was frequently something that was also somewhat juicy, not juicy enough to be messy, but something where you could have that instead of water. An apple was good, an orange was good. And you got chicken. You got fried chicken of some sort coming complete with its little handle and its bone and everything else. And this was how you traveled.
But fried chicken was still a Southern specialty. It would take a cantankerous colonel to harness that spicy, special flavor, put it in a bucket instead of a shoebox, and turn it into a national phenomenon.
Hi to there, little folks. How are you, huh? You're great people. Hello there, how are you? So nice to see you.
Can you believe it? How did it happen? How did he do it? What is his name?
Harlan Sanders considered himself a complete washout. A 7th grade dropout, he had failed at one job after another. Streetcar conductor, steamboat ferryman, railroad fireman. And then in 1930, he bought his own service station in Corbin, Kentucky, right off the interstate highway. But after the customers caught the smell of Sanders cooking for his family in the back room, Sanders found that the food outsold the gas. His specialty? A tender fried chicken made with his own spice mixture. He called them his 11 herbs and spices. His chicken joint got reviewed in travel guides and was put on lists of recommended restaurants. In 1935, the governor recognized the self-made man by rewarding him with a very local distinction, the honorary title of Kentucky Colonel. That's a title familiar to hamburger legend Dave Thomas, who once worked for Colonel Sanders.
That was his role. He was a Kentucky colonel. I'm a Kentucky colonel. There's hundreds of Kentucky colonels. But the colonel played the part.
Harlan Sanders liked the sound of his title very much, and from then on he called himself Colonel Sanders. By the late 1940s, Sanders was a Kentucky legend. He had found something he was good at. But just when Sanders was happy with things as they were, his road took a sharp turn, literally.
So then they moved the highway, and that really kind of cut him off.
Traffic slowed to a trickle. Business died, and Sanders sold the restaurant at a huge loss. But the colonel was tenacious. He cashed his very first Social Security check and set out in his rickety Chevrolet with a bag of spices and a pressure cooker he designed himself. His idea was the beginning of franchising. He would offer any restaurant owner a taste of his fried chicken. If they liked it, he would send them a bag of the secret spices already mixed. His pressure cooker could fry a bird in less than half the time needed with a regular iron skillet. On a visit to Salt Lake City in 1952, he tried out his technique on a successful restaurant owner named Pete Harmon. Sanders told Harmon, "I'm making you dinner tonight." The colonel was a perfectionist. It took him 5 hours to cook supper.
So about 9 o'clock, the chicken come off, and I thought we was going to eat, and it sure looked good. and he said, "Oh no, we got to make the gravy, and you have to cook those cracklings till they float to get the right flavor." So we had dinner at 10 o'clock that night, and boy, it was good.
That's the white meat. I always put the white meat in last because
Harmon jumped at the colonel's deal. For every chicken he sold using the colonel's recipe, Harmon would give Sanders a 5-cent royalty. Now they had to figure out what to call him.
We tried several names. We was already in Utah, so it didn't mean anything Utah fried chicken. So, and I says, "Well, I never been. This guy's from Kentucky, and I never been there. But to me, Kentucky means Southern hospitality and good food."
Customers bought up so much of the new Kentucky Fried Chicken that Pete Harmon began opening restaurants that served only the colonel's chicken. He started serving it in buckets when he purchased 500 surplus cardboard tubs and realized it was the perfect container for a family meal.
We put 14 pieces of chicken in a bucket and a pint of mashed potatoes and 5 rolls. And you lifted it, and you didn't feel like you had $4.50 worth. So We put piney gravy in it, and then you had your money's worth when you lifted it.
By 1960, restaurant owners were selling the Colonel's chicken out of 200 restaurants. 3 years after that, it was 600. In 1964, Harlan Sanders sold his interest to a pair of entrepreneurs, but stayed on as the official pitchman. The company also slapped the Colonel's picture on the side of every bucket, and the Colonel himself became an international fried chicken ambassador. He traveled the world well into his 80s, cutting ribbons at new franchises and extolling the virtues of tender, tasty chicken.
You've heard of Colonel Sanders' secret recipe. Well, that's no story.
And woe to the franchisee whose food didn't meet the salty-tongued Colonel's standards.
And he used to say, if I ever catch anybody not cooking it right, he says, I'll back my Cadillac up there and take their cookers away from them.
You. And to think that you're so no count that you couldn't hold.
You know, forget the chicken, but the gravy was the most important thing. And it was a really obsession with him.
It was the first thing he inspected when he went into a restaurant, and he was very critical, and you better have the gravy right or you were in for a serious tongue lashing.
It's finger-licking good. So when you're in the mood for some fabulous food, just say Kentucky Fried Chicken for me.
By 1969, there were more Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets than there were McDonald's restaurants. Eventually, KFC would lose that lead, but the Colonel had won plenty of victories. He had virtually invented the idea of food franchising, selling branches in a successful restaurant concept. And he had taken fried chicken from the kitchens of the South to tabletops all across America and well beyond. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. The sandwich is the most democratic of American dishes, because who you are is often reflected in what you put inside your sandwich. No other nation took to the sandwich the way America did. But the sandwich actually owes its name to an 18th century British blue blood. Sir John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, was a passionate gambler. One day, as the story goes, he got hungry in the middle of a card game. He didn't want to get his cards greasy, so he asked for a piece of meat between slabs of bread. The system worked, and the story got out and even crossed the Atlantic. Here in America, we experimented with the sandwich, and by the end of the 19th century, we could offer the world a truly original sandwich. It's peanut butter, of course, and it started out as healthy nutrition for adults. In fact, it's said that a doctor invented the stuff, not, as everyone thinks, George Washington Carver.
George Washington Carver did many good things, and particularly with the peanut, but he didn't create peanut butter. We have good evidence that a doctor in St. Louis in 1890 certainly was eating peanut butter ground up.
Actually, this good doctor created peanut butter as a way to feed protein to his elderly patients who had no teeth. Eventually, in the 1890s, John Kellogg, father of the cornflake, patented a way of making peanut butter and advertised it as a pasty adhesive substance. Certainly not an approach you'd think would ring up sales, but it did.
As soon as you have peanut butter created, you have peanut butter sandwiches. And then the type of foods that are applied to peanut butter sandwiches multiply dramatically. So you have tomatoes and peanut butter, you have anchovies and peanut butter, you have liver and peanut butter, you have all these types of sandwiches that would sound god-awful today.
Good news for sandwich eaters.
Peanut butter and bacon became so popular that Oscar Mayer created a special spread with the two flavors mixed.
What a tantalizing flavor Oscar Mayer bacon gives to peanut butter.
But one peanut butter combo created by some caring mother sometime before World War II took the prize. Good old peanut butter and jelly.
Mom, can I have a sandwich?
Then the government fed PB&J sandwiches to our soldiers. Loaded with protein, easy to store, ship, and serve, peanut butter helped the U.S. Army refute the old cliche that wars are won on meat.
It stuck. And why it stuck, I can't tell you, other than the fact that as a child I loved it, and I'm sure most of the rest of us that had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as kids loved it too.
And it seems we still do. Americans eat an average of nearly 3.5 pounds of peanut butter per person per year. That's 800 million pounds total, enough to smoothly coat the entire floor of the Grand Canyon. But whether it's with peanut butter or anything else, it takes a lot of work to feed sandwiches to a large family, what with all that cutting. That changed in the 1920s. And if you don't think it was a big deal, think of how often we rate something wonderful as the best thing since. Sliced bread revolutionized the sandwich world, and we owe it to an Iowa salesman named O.F. Rowetter, whose simple 1928 invention could slice a whole loaf in a few seconds.
Sharp blades moving at great speed cut this bread into smooth slices.
The time was right for another sandwich landmark, Wonder Bread.
Come and get it, Tag. Plenty of Wonder Bread sandwiches today.
The Taggart Company, which offered Wonder for the first time in the 1920s, said the name referred to the wondrous size of the bread.
You'll never be satisfied with any other.
But this new loaf also boasted another wondrous attribute. Thanks to preservatives and a plastic wrapper, the bread would outlast your average fresh-baked loaf by several days.
Authorities agree that the enrichment of bread has been a major factor in the greater vigor of our young people.
And once the bread slicers began humming, Wonder Bread was pre-sliced. The familiar polka-dotted package came to symbolize the American good life.
My grandmother, for instance, when she was growing up, her idea of food heaven was white, soft bread, because that to her represented America.
Occasionally, white bread has been vilified for making the American sandwich a monotonous affair. In fact, the opposite may be true.
The slicing of bread and the marketing of sliced bread probably does encourage sandwich-like quick foods, and any dish that comes out of an ethnic cuisine or a foreign cuisine that can be turned into something sandwich-like becomes quite popular.
Immigrants in cities that were only a few hours apart developed and claimed distinct specialty sandwiches. In Buffalo, home to many German immigrants, the official city sandwich is beef on weck. A slab of roast beef on a heavily salted roll with enough horseradish to make your eyes water. In Pittsburgh, the renowned local sandwich is served at Primanti Brothers. But don't bother ordering fries and a side of slaw. In Pittsburgh, they're served right on the hand-sliced Italian bread.
Back in the early 30s, Primanti's restaurant was open from, say, midnight till 6 o'clock in the morning, and all the truckers would come in and drop off the produce, and they needed something to eat real quick to take on the road. So legend has it that the Primanti brothers put everything together on one sandwich, wrapped it up, and just gave it to the truckers that way so they can eat it on the road while they're traveling around.
And in Chicago, they're known to pile spiced beef onto an Italian roll, then dip the whole thing into the beef juices and eat it dripping wet.
Now how we eat it in Chicago is you have to have both elbows on the counter like this. Your legs spread back like this so you don't get none of the juices on you. And you grab your sandwich and you start eating. You see what I'm talking about? Well, how this drips off. Wish I had some napkins.
American eaters are serious about variety, so if the sandwiches themselves aren't much different, no problem. We'll give them different names. Take the universally loved combination of salami and other cold cuts on a long Italian roll. That was originally called a grinder in New England because of the chewing it took to get through the crusty bread. But during the Second World War, deli owner Benedetto Capaldo in Groton, Connecticut, started shipping huge quantities of his grinder to the workers at the town's famous submarine factories along the river. The shipbuilders ordered more than 500 of them a day, so Capaldo started calling them submarine sandwiches in honor of his new clientele. In Pennsylvania, the sandwiches were named hoagies, a name believed to have been borrowed from Hog Island, another shipyard where workers ate the big Italian sandwiches. And in Louisiana, they were called poor boys, after a restaurant gave out free sandwiches to striking workers in 1929. And that's only the beginning. What about Zeppelins, torpedoes, rockets, heroes?
I'm famished.
But no matter where in America you are, no eatery is more closely linked to the sandwich than the deli. Delicatessens got their start on the East Coast in the waves of German and Jewish immigrants who came through Ellis Island. The delicatessen became a neighborhood fixture where these immigrants could find the delicacies of home, hence the name. Delikat, the German word for delicacy, combined with Essen, the word for eat.
During the Great Depression, delicatessen owners literally banded together and started a campaign to convince Americans of other backgrounds to learn to eat delicatessen foods.
Just step right down, folks.
French and tossed salad.
The centerpiece of the delicatessen menu came to be sandwiches made from the cured meats, corned beef and pastrami, both common among the poor cultures of Europe.
John, I need cheesecake.
Corned beef is cured by soaking or injecting it with salt water. Then it's rubbed with garlic and cloves. It's boiled or steamed for the familiar gentle flavor.
Gonna need a side order string beans with that omelet. Thank you.
Its cousin pastrami, the name is Yiddish, not Italian, is smoked before it's steamed and encrusted with ground pepper and other spices.
Side it down,
but one of the most famous deli sandwiches was invented in the 1930s.
One Reuben, please. One Reuben.
When deliman Arnold Reuben hit on a really distinctive combination.
Arnold originally, when he made the sandwich, made it on toasted rye, and the way it was made is he would toast the rye bread, then a layer of corned beef, the sauerkraut, and then the Swiss cheese was melted. It became unique, okay? And all the flavors just melded together.
The original Reuben sandwich featured more than half a pound of meat, dripping with sauerkraut and melted cheese. It was served on giant slices of rye bread, sliced extra thin. And people were willing to pay for the gastronomic event, a whopping $5. And before long, the sandwich was a national phenomenon.
The Reuben sandwich has become a celebrity in its own right. And it's like taking a picture of a celebrity on the street. You don't need their permission, okay? And you don't need for them to sign a waiver, okay? That's what the sandwich has become. It is its own institution. It has become its own celebrity.
No question about it. Most of America's favorite foods can be linked in one way or another to the sandwich. What makes a hot dog or a hamburger a hamburger? It's the sandwich treatment. And at a time when fewer and fewer Americans take time out for lunch, the sandwich, just as portable as it was in the days of the Earl of Sandwich, is still lord of the lunch hour. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. Welcome to Szechuan Palace, or Hunan Taste, or Golden Dragon, or Jade King. Whatever the name, it's a taste of the Far East in your hometown. And as you're drawn in closer, seduced by exotic aromas, you slide into your booth and behold, sweet and sour pork, fried rice, and for that authentic finish, a fortune cookie. Enjoy. But don't think you've just consumed a Chinese meal. The foods you just feasted on are as American as the hot dog. In fact, a whole lot of Chinese food, our favorite ethnic food, is just that, ours. It's American. The first large group of Chinese immigrants was lured to America in the 1850s by stories of the golden mountains of California. It was gold rush fever. And thousands of Chinese, mostly from the southern Chinese city of Canton, answered the call. In San Francisco, where most of the immigrants landed, the Chinese clustered in one section of town soon known as Chinatown, an oasis of traditional Chinese culture swirling with the inescapable smells of traditional Chinese foods.
You didn't need to have a map to get to where you wanted, just a good nose without sinus problems. If you want a ham yu, salty fish, or sang yu, fish, fresh fish, you knew that this was a street. This was called Ham Yu Gai, Salty Fish Alley. If you wanted herbs, there was an area for that. Dessert, you can smell the sweetness.
Most of the Chinese immigrants to America were farmers and served the peasant food of Canton, a simple menu featuring stir-fried meals with rice, mild tea, and platefuls of dim sum, traditional finger food that included everything from shrimp dumplings to tripe to bird's feet. The first Chinese restaurants served these foods from home to Chinese customers who couldn't or didn't want to cook.
This is a heavily male migration, and whenever you have a heavily male migration, you get a proliferation of restaurants to serve those men without women. You see the same case in the Greek and the Italian migrations that you see in the Chinese migration. Lots of restaurants.
Chow chows, they were called, and they offered all you could eat for $1 to hungry Chinese laborers. But then something odd happened.
Pretty soon, the non-Chinese were coming in, and the Chinese realized that this is a business. This is a business in itself. So before long, restaurants started popping up.
Of course, the owners knew they'd have to westernize their food a bit to keep the non-Chinese coming. But the Chinese adapted. Which is not to say all was harmony. The Americans were often referred to as Lo Fan, or the barbarians. And what the barbarians wanted was chop suey. Chop suey has its roots in Canton, where the words sop suey mean miscellaneous scraps. And that just about sums it up. Chop suey is Chinese leftovers. Its exact origins are clouded in mystery. But it was created here in America.
One story has to do with a Chinese cook faced with a bunch of hungry miners, again in the off hours when he doesn't have a whole lot left in the kitchen, but they're hungry, they've got money in their pockets. He chops up whatever he's got, puts it on a sauce, throws it on some rice, and hands it to them.
It's not really a Chinese dish, it's just more of an idea.
And a very flexible idea at that. Chop suey was usually made from whatever vegetables Chinese cooks could get their hands on. Carrots, potatoes, and tomatoes were just as likely to turn up in chop suey as water chestnuts or Chinese cabbage. The meat could be whatever the customer wanted. The most essential ingredients were bean sprouts, soy sauce, and more soy sauce. If they were going to eat Chinese, Americans wanted as much of that Chinese flavor as they could get. But only from the food. By the late 1800s, many Americans were worried that the Chinese, who worked long hours for little pay, would take their jobs. The Chinese became targets of prejudice by many. Their clothing, hairstyles, and their practice of eating food with little wooden sticks were ridiculed and reviled. Bending to these fears, in 1882, Congress severely limited further immigration from China. As for Chinese food, the customers still came, even though there were rumors that all sorts of creatures were secretly being chopped into chop suey. Mice, rats, or your neighbor's missing pet.
There's a lot of concern about how clean it is. But there's also the sense you can safely eat in what is otherwise seen as a kind of a dangerous neighborhood, and it's kind of thrilling to go to Chinatown in the years around 1900 as a tourist, and guidebooks really sell it that way. And I mean, are Chinese restaurateurs going to turn down these paying customers? Of course they're not.
America was feeling good by the end of the First World War. The war was won, and the stock market looked to climb forever. The exotic was what the country craved now. The new music was jazz, and the fashionable food was Chinese. In cities across the country, Chinatowns lit up with neon. Sleek Art Deco lunchrooms began offering dinner for one and dinner for two.
For many, many years, that's all we saw because there was nothing else that was really known. The Chinese chef didn't speak English. The Caucasian customers did not speak Chinese, but they had a common ground, a dinner one for one, dinner for two.
Pick one item from column A and one from column B. And the top sellers, egg rolls and wonton soup. And sweet and sour pork, another crude American revision of an old Cantonese recipe. And the meal was always finished off with a fortune cookie. It's only natural that the message in the cookie knows our future. This is from China with its 3,000 years of wisdom. Except that the cookie didn't originate in China. It's most likely from California. There was a tradition in China of hiding messages in cakes. It said that rebels in the 12th century got messages past the emperor's guards in what were called moon cakes. But the first of the sweet folded envelopes, the way we eat them now, are often credited to the owner of a Chinese eatery in L.A. The story goes he came up with the idea in 1916 as a way to amuse his customers awaiting their orders.
They're entertaining. They contain an element of surprise, and the mixture of entertainment with food has been a very important theme in sort of the introduction of foreigners to American culinary life. We like entertainment along with our food. And I think the fortune cookie gives us entertainment along with something sweet.
Oh, we're so glad you could come.
The combination of the flavors and the exotic found in Chinese restaurants proved irresistible.
Oh, the real Chinese dishes are over here.
Thanks, Bob.
Chinese food became an official American diversion.
You know, there's no telling what we'll get, but I'm willing to take a chance if you are.
Oh, that's the fun of it, Bob.
Here, girls, here's the ways how to use the chopsticks.
Eating with sticks, once sneered at as a sure sign of Chinese inferiority, was now the signature skill of the sophisticated diner. Nothing was more fun than going to a Chinese restaurant to share a table full of steaming platters.
Chinese love to eat. We never ask you, how are you? We ask you, have you eaten? Sik mei ya? Have you eaten? Because we want the door to be open for us to feed you some more. Food is a way of communicating love, friendship, and for the Chinese people, the only way to eat is to put all the food in the middle and share.
In the 1950s, the boom in food for the road made no dent in the Chinese business. They'd been offering food to go for 100 years. Chinese restaurateurs may even take the credit for inventing American takeout. 19th century waiters from Chinese eateries regularly took whole meals, complete with plates, bowls, and silverware, to private homes. When President Nixon opened relations with the People's Republic of China in 1972, interest in a wider range of Chinese foods rose sharply. The Cantonese grip on the American market came to an end. The craze for authentic Chinese food began to spread. Restaurants serving food from Hunan, Shanghai, or Nanking appeared next to the chop suey houses. Today, few people order chop suey. American eaters have forsaken the simple improvised meals that taught them to love Chinese food. But chop suey secured a permanent place for Chinese food in America's palate. In a land of immigrants, Chinese may be only one of many wildly different flavors, but as one of the first exotic ethnic foods, it won enough affection and acceptance that in the end, it is as American as apple pie, especially when you remember that apple pie is imported too. We got that from England. And speaking of imports, when the fortune cookie finally crossed the Pacific and showed up on Asian restaurant tables in 1989, It was touted as the genuine American fortune cookie. We now return to American Eats, History on a Bun. Ice cream, smooth, cold, and sweet. Never mind asking who loves ice cream. The real question is, who doesn't love ice cream?
Come and get it.
There are ice cream parlors on the sun-scorched equator and in frozen Arctic fishing villages. There's an ice cream shop on the Caribbean island of Barbados that offers ice cream flavored with flying fish. But no one loves ice cream the way Americans do. It was in America where ice cream joined the cone and where it first cloaked itself in chocolate to become every child's idea of heaven. Every food comes with a set of legends. If the stories are true, ice cream has gotten itself mixed up with some of the most famous folks in history. There's the Roman Emperor Nero, who sent slaves to the mountains to retrieve freshly fallen snow, which he mixed with fruit juice and honey. The great adventurer Marco Polo, who brought Europe its first recipe for ice cream from China. Because ice cream was popular in Europe, it was popular with American colonists, too.
Ice cream was consumed by George Washington and by Thomas Jefferson, and all of the nobility would consume ice cream. It really had to take off after the French Revolution, of which you had, again, French chefs coming to America, and one of the things that many French chefs did was open up ice cream parlors.
In those days, the creation of ice cream required lots of ice and lots of elbow grease, vigorous beating in a pewter pot, which in turn was immersed in a tub of ice and salt. Hard work for not much reward.
And what you got was something that was kind of slushy and had little pieces of ice in it. It was not the kind of creamy ice cream that we're used to today. As a matter of fact, a lot of people drank it out of cups and kind of sipped it like they would sip tea.
Ice cream was expensive to make. Up to the late 1700s, it was generally reserved for the rich. But the times, they were a-changing. First, by the 1800s, commercial ice houses were open year-round. Second, in 1846, a burst of inspiration. A Philadelphia woman named Nancy Johnson invented the hand-powered ice cream machine. The whole troublesome process was reduced to turning a crank. Thanks to these two developments, ice cream could now be made in the humblest of households. But the boost that made ice cream the mega superstar it is today was its introduction to a magic elixir, soda water. That happened in 1874, and it happened in a soda fountain. Because soda water was originally taken as medicine, soda fountains were first located in pharmacies.
And there, everybody could partake of the pleasure so wholesome and so healthful.
Later, soda fountains opened on their own in towns all over America.
In the days before teenagers and young people had cars and mobility and the kind of permissive atmosphere that they have today, the soda fountain was the respectable place to go courting. So they played a very important role in letting young men and young women meet in a socially acceptable atmosphere.
At the center of the soda fountain was the soda jerk. Part circus barker, part waiter, this man with the magic fingers often put on a show as he presented you with the delectable drink of your choice. The different recipes for these sodas included ingredients from caramel to eggs to sweet cream. Then in 1874, an ice cream icon was invented when Philadelphia soda jerk Robert Greene ran out of sweet cream.
He took a dollop of ice cream and basically just plopped it in there, and lo and behold, he created the soda. And people really liked it, and it really went over big time. And within a number of years, it seemed to go national.
It tasted good. Too good for some. At the time, soda was considered almost as intoxicating as alcohol, so the sale of soda was banned in many towns on Sunday. According to legend, the rich ice cream soda in particular became the target of pious clergymen who railed against drinking it on Sunday.
Enterprising operators came up with the idea, hey, well, we'll just come up with a soda without the soda. So they put ice cream in a bowl, and they put chocolate syrup on the top, and there they had a new concoction. They called it the sundae.
Add 1 spoon, and voila, no soda in sight.
So many people were ordering that it was really a successful, item. So instead of just selling it on Sunday, they sold it all during the week. But they changed the name from Sunday to Sundae, the S-U-N-D-A-E.
But what about to-go? Hamburgers and hot dogs were climbing onto buns. Why shouldn't America's favorite dessert be part of the movable feast? The moment came in 1904 at the St. Louis World's Fair, where another of America's great food accidents is said to have taken place. According to legend, the main player in this drama was a Syrian immigrant.
Ernest Hamwi. He was basically making these Persian-type pastries, flat waffles, at his food stand. And next door was an ice cream seller who ran out of dishes to sell his ice cream. So Hamwi rushed to his aid, said, here. He rolled up a spire, to make a cone, and they put the ice cream in it, and it was a real big hit.
The new cone, this edible bowl minus the spoon, was such a big hit that in just 5 years, Americans bought 30 million of them. As the cone joined the ice cream establishment, novelties began to spring up. The first breakthrough came in the spring of 1920 in Iowa with the auspicious marriage of chocolate candy and vanilla ice cream.
Christian Nelson was a high school Latin teacher, and after school he operated a small candy and ice cream shop to supplement his income. And he noticed that the children would come in after school and would have a difficult time deciding whether they wanted to spend their nickel on ice cream or on candy.
And it dawned on Mr. Nelson that maybe this is an opportunity where we should combine them into one.
Nelson initially called his invention the ice cream bar, but changed it to Eskimo pie, hoping the new name would make his product more appealing. It did. The first 250,000 pies sold out in 24 hours. Nelson's Eskimo pie was only the tip of the ice cream novelty iceberg. In 1920, Prohibition handed ice cream a tremendous surge in business.
It's no longer a question of liquor or no liquor.
Beer factories were refitted to make ice cream. Soda fountains absorbed thousands of former barflies who needed somewhere legal to turn. Ice cream novelties like the Klondike bar, an imitator of the Eskimo pie, were a good bet in those non-alcoholic days. And Harry Burt Sr., a candy store owner, came up with one novelty that would become a classic.
He tried to replicate the Eskimo pie, but his family thought that it was too messy to hold a chocolate-covered ice cream bar. Well, he had already had, for years, a candy bar with a stick in it called the Good Humor Sucker. So he adapted that stick to his ice cream concoction, and just like the Eskimo pie, it was a runaway success.
Burt called his sweet treats Good Humor bars. Burt took his idea to the streets with a single truck he operated with his son. Then he trained a small squad of drivers to bring his products to neighborhoods and business districts. The salesman drivers, impeccably dressed in white uniforms, saluted male customers and tipped their caps to women. Burt took his team from Youngstown, Ohio to Chicago, where, the story goes, the mob tried to strong-arm him for protection money. Burt said no, and may have been one of the few Chicagoans to benefit from actually refusing an offer he couldn't refuse.
Well, they say that when the mob apparently threatened and then blew up the Good Humor trucks when they tried franchising their product in Chicago, that apparently made the front page news, and the fact that they didn't give in to the mob put them in good standing with the public.
Good humor men took on mythic proportions. Stories abounded of the white-clad heroes reporting fires, rushing newborns to the hospital, supplying ice cream to flood victims, even stopping a counterfeit money ring. By the 1950s, the average American was gobbling up 20 quarts of ice cream a year. Soon soda fountains gave way to the ice cream franchises, chains that offered both consistency of quality and variety. The American sweet tooth is apparently insatiable. In the 1980s, the ice cream business seemed to fall into the hands of the so-called super premium brands. Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's fought for the bragging rights as the smoothest or creamiest or freshest. But ice cream fans showed that their hearts were still in the glory days of novelties. Since 1995, the most popular ice cream novelty in America has been the good old Klondike bar.